back to Zilog and Moto. I'm your host Dave, and we're here to review each and every English language game released for the Sega Master System, Genesis, Sega CD, and 32X. And maybe certain other titles here and there depending on the situation. Say, for instance, when I reviewed Streets of Rage 4 earlier this year. Because, come on, I had to review that. It's still a Streets of Rage game even though it wasn't released on the Genesis, and it was done by .emu instead of Sega. And seriously, go play it if you haven't already. It's certainly going to be more interesting than today's review, unfortunately. You see, when I set out with the mission statement that I wanted to review every single English language release for the aforementioned Tower of Power related consoles, I meant it. And that doesn't just mean action games, sports titles, RPGs. It also means the entire series of Sega Club edutainment games, including Sesame Street Counting Cafe, that we looked at back in episode 36 during season 1. And it actually wasn't half bad, if you were wondering. And even beyond edutainment titles, this Genesis also featured a couple, creativity suites, I guess you could call them. The first of those titles is the subject of this week's review, and that game is Art Alive. Art Alive was published by Sega in the United States in what I believe was late 1991, before making its way to the Mega Drive around the world in early 92. I say believe because this is one of those titles that's hard to find an exact release date for, and there's conflicting information out there about it, so we're just going to go with late 1991 and be done with it. Regardless of exactly when it came out, one thing is definitely true: it was released before Nintendo released a game you may have heard of, Mario Paint, for the Super Nintendo, which instead came out about 9 months later towards the end of summer in 1992. But still, given the similar nature on the surface of both games, and the fact that they both came out within a year of each other, makes them very easy to compare directly. Sega may have beat Nintendo to the punch this time, but ultimately, as any gamer who's ever dealt with a botched early launch can tell you, being first to the market does not matter unless you have a quality product to match. Real quick, did any of you play with Mario Paint at all, or remember seeing it on the shelves? Well, if you did, you probably would have noticed that it came in an oversized box, similar to Earthbound. However, while Earthbound was in a larger box due to the strategy guide that came with it, Mario Paint instead came in a larger box due to the inclusion of the Super NES mouse and a special mouse pad to use it on. Why do I bring this up? Well, do you see a mouse pad here? No, you don't. To add insult to injury, you might be thinking to yourself, but wait, I distinctly remember there being a mouse for the Sega Genesis. And there were. 2, in fact. A 2-button device released in Japan and Europe dubbed the Sega Mouse, and then an updated version with 3 buttons and a start button called the Mega Mouse. There were a total of 30 games for the Genesis and Sega CD that supported the mice, including a game we looked at previously, Crime Patrol, back in episode 69. But guess what game doesn't support mice? Art Alive, due to coming out 2 years before the mice hit the market. Remember, being first isn't always best. Let's take a closer look at Art Alive, but first, a look at the package. So here's my copy of Art Alive, and it's in decent condition. It could certainly look better, because if you look closely at the spine and on the back, there's a few scratches to the plastic. None very deep, and no actual holes or tears, so that's good. And the outer cover has done its job, as the inner cover still looks very colorful and bright, with no water damage or sun bleaching, and no excessive wear to the top or bottom edges due to the cover sliding out of place. The hang tab is missing at the top, and it's a bit rough, so I need to probably sand that down at some point. Art Alive isn't exactly a very valuable Genesis title, and if I wanted to, I could buy a copy of this in better condition for relatively cheaply, $15 or so. But it's just not something I care about too much. Maybe if I run across it on a table at a show at some point or something, but this copy is good enough for me for what it is. Moving on from the condition of the case, immediately what stands out to me is the fact that it's not using any kind of standard Sega formatting for the artwork. Remember, this is a 1991 release, so it should have been featuring the black cross-hatching background with the cover art on top of that, at least for first-party Sega titles. Third parties were obviously doing whatever they wanted. So, having said that, Art Alive stood out on store shelves and in toy catalogs at the time, and I think it makes sense considering that this is supposed to be a creative title, and not just doing what everyone else was doing, cookie cutter style. Beyond just the fact that it doesn't use a standard formatting for the time, I actually like this cover. The plain white background is a little but I understand that they did it because it makes all the art from the program stand out, and really try to sell what you could potentially do with it. I also like the emphasis on animals in the cover, going with the art alive, so it works on multiple levels. The aqua pattern border is a nice touch as well, and definitely works for an art title more than just black cross-hatching. This cover art was used for the European release as well, but Japan got a wildly different one, and I can understand that due to this cover not necessarily appealing to the Japanese culturally. But boy, they went in a different direction. One last thing to mention about the front cover, the disclaimer down at the bottom that's a little hard to see, which mentions specifically that this is a drawing and animation program and not a game. Don't know how many kids or parents actually read that, but it's there. Flipping over to the back and, it's that white inset from the front again. Other than that, this isn't that bad a rear cover, but considering how the program looks on screen is key to an art title, it would have been nice to have screenshots that aren't obscured by each other. There is one important thing mentioned here that I'll talk about later, and that's the emphasis that you can tape your creations on your VCR. That probably sounds innocent at first, but it's a problem I'll explain in a minute. Opening up the case, and the cartridge has a little wear to it, but it's not too bad. The manual is similarly worn, but it's fully intact. And that's a good thing, because this is a pretty big manual. 28 pages in fact, not counting the cover. And in those 28 pages, there's a pretty thorough explanation of all the different tools in the software to aid you and your creative abilities to get something on the canvas that you can be proud of. I'm actually impressed with how well written the manual is. I know some of the elements will be second nature after just a few uses, but it's still nice to have a reference to fall back on for some of the more involved choices, like creating your own animations. Okay, that's the package. Let's get to the review so I can wow everyone with my absolutely horrible artistic skills, which should already be evident to everyone who's subscribed to this channel. Shifting from doing a review on what's essentially a Sega Kids title a week after doing a major adult-oriented port of a famous arcade game in Mortal Kombat is a bit of a shift, but variety is the spice of life, or at least it is according to 18th century poet William Cowper. And there's your bit of education for this week if you've ever wondered where that phrase came from. I bet William Cowper would have shit himself if he saw Art Alive in action, much less Mortal Kombat. But I digress. As I mentioned earlier, as it's so helpfully written on the cover, Art Alive isn't a game, it's a quote drawing and animation program. So there's not any specific traditional gameplay elements for me to review, but I'm still going to go over what you can do in Art Alive and try to give it at least a rating based on how good an effort I feel like it was, and if it's something that's worth messing around with, even if it's just for a few hours. However, before I get into the actual title, I want to mention that this is technically not a first-party game. I mean, it was produced and released by Sega themselves, but the game was actually developed by a company called Western Technologies, whose main claim to fame was being the original developer behind the Vectrex console from the early 80s. I've actually already looked at another Western Technologies game, Trivial Pursuit Interactive Multimedia game, last year in episode 44. If you don't remember that one, well, let's just say it was okay. Nothing special. Art Alive was their first solo Sega-related effort, which is interesting to me. I almost wonder if Sega wanted to have an art title, but didn't want to dedicate one of their own teams to doing the developing, so they got Western Technologies to do the work for them, as opposed to the more usual method that these titles take, where a developer creates the game on their own and then went to Sega to see if they wanted to produce it. All this is just conjecture, of course, but it's interesting that a developer's first effort for a new console wasn't a game, as they had to know the sales potential for a title like Art Alive was limited at best. Sure, there were some kids and parents that the idea of Art Alive would really appeal to, especially since at the time a PC with similar art capabilities was much more expensive than a Genesis, but really, what's going to move copies on a game console? An art program? Or, calling back to last week again, Johnny Blade knocking Sub-Zero's head off. Okay, enough filibustering. What does Art Alive actually allow you to do? Well, from a basic standpoint, it allows you to draw using basic tools that you might expect to see with something like MS Paint or other similar rudimentary drawing tools. There's a pencil tool for freehand drawing, a straight line tool for when you have a definite start and end point in mind, a curved line tool that allows curved lines whose directions can change on the fly based on where you're pointing the aiming tool, a box tool and oval tool for drawing rectangles and circles, a spray paint tool for when you need something a little messy, a paint can tool for filling in areas that have been enclosed, and finally an eraser for cleaning up stray marks or just when you want to start something over. Also, there's 3 different thicknesses that can be chosen for all these tools, for when you want smaller details or lines that will stand out. Again, all of these tools are pretty standard if you've ever used a basic drawing application, so if you're familiar with MS Paint, you'll be able to jump right in and start creating. I was a little disappointed that there was only 3 thicknesses that were offered, but since we're not dealing with a high-resolution canvas anyway, it's not the end of the world. However, what colors can you choose when drawing your lines and objects? Well, here's where we get to one of my huge issues with Art Alive, and it's one of its major shortcomings. Everyone knows that the Genesis has issues with limited colors on screen at one time, with the ability to only show 64 colors at once out of a 512 color palette. So you'd think that Art Alive would at least give you the option to have 64 colors available at one time on a canvas, or 61 if you want to be pedantic. Well, you would be wrong. In the palette section in the upper left-hand corner of the screen, there's a section of 16 colors and 4 patterns made up of 2 of those colors that can be selected for your artistic purposes, and 2 of those available colors are black and white. But Art Alive offers 8 different palettes consisting of those 20 selections. So there should actually be 8 times 14, which equals 112, plus black and white for a total of 114 possible colors, right? Oh, if only it were that easy. While that would make sense, unfortunately when you switch between the 8 palettes, the colors you have already used get updated to the corresponding color in the new palette. So, say for instance you draw a line that is pink and using spot number 2 in the template. If you change to the next template, where blue is in that number 2 spot, anything that you've used that color for changes from pink to blue. Think back to the intricate animal drawings that are on the cover of Art Alive. Notice anything? All those drawings only have about 4 or 5 colors to them, and those colors are always in the same palette. I don't know why on earth Western Technologies thought it was a good idea to limit a program whose literally only purpose is art to a quarter of what the Genesis is actually capable of, especially when the Genesis was already limited in this capacity in general, much less in comparison to the Super Nintendo. Moving on from this color debacle, let's talk about the other features that were included for the creation purposes. Art Alive also features clip art, animations, text, and pre-designed backgrounds that can be added to the canvas so that not absolutely everything has to be done from scratch. But each of these has confounding limitations, not unlike the limited color issue. Let's start with the clip art. The included clip art is fine, and actually includes a few images of Sonic the Hedgehog and ToeJam and Earl. And Art Alive will horizontally flip the art depending on which way you're moving the controller when you place it on the canvas, so that's nice. But there's only about 30 or so bits of clip art, or stamps as Art Alive refers to them, and it just seems like they could have included a lot more. There's also the option to create your own stamp, which is cool, but problematic for reasons I'll get to later. Art Alive also features animations, which are essentially stamps that have 4 frames of animation that can be placed on screen to make it alive. Get it? The animations have 4 different patterns that can be assigned to them, so that they move around on the screen on their own. But there's also a 5th one that allows you to control the animation with your controller, which is amusing. You can even customize the animations by editing each of the 4 frames if you like, but this runs into the same problem that the stamps runs into. Wrapping up, just a quick note about the pre-designed backgrounds and text. Included in Art Alive are 6 background base images that can work like coloring book pages if you like, or just serve as inspiration. One in particular is nice if you want to create a card for someone. This is a great idea, but only 6? And one of those 6 is just the Art Alive title screen, because I know I can't wait to color my own version of the title screen. And the text is similarly skimpy. It's there, which is especially important if you wanted to create that virtual birthday card I just referenced. But what if you wanted to put some extra exclamation points after happy birthday? Well, you're going to have to draw those yourself, because the only text you're getting is uppercase A through Z and 0 through 9, with no symbols or any other characters. Also, to add insult to injury, the only customization can be done to the text is to change the color, as there's only one font available, and only one size of that font, so I hope you weren't trying to draw a comic with a word balloon. The issue I referred to a bit ago with the custom stamps and animations is a very simple one, and it's actually larger than just those two things. Nowhere so far have I mentioned how you can save the art you create in Art Alive, and there's a reason for that. You can't. There is no way to save stamps, animations, or art that you've drawn. It's only in existence as long as the Genesis is booted up. Spend 3 hours making your masterpiece and the Genesis freezes or loses power? Well, sucks to be you, as you simply just flushed 3 hours of your life down the toilet. And anything with a deep level of detail will probably be impossible to be recreated exactly. It is absolutely unimaginable to me that Sega allowed Western Technologies to ship Art Alive without a save function. I just can't fathom that no one brought this up as a problem. It's not like this is an obscure glitch in level 3 or something. This is why they mentioned recording Art Alive on your VCR on the rear cover and in the manual, because that's the only way you can keep a copy of your work. Just embarrassing. Not quite as bad as not being able to save your work, but still a bit infuriating, is the control aspects of Art Alive. Art Alive makes use of the 3-button controller, and all 3 buttons and start are used, with the start button opening the menu, the A button toggling drawing on or off, B choosing options in the menu, and C changing the speed of your cursor without having to bring up the menu. This is all fine, but any kind of art title needs a mouse for drawing and laying out designs, as the D-pad just simply isn't precise enough to get the job done without lots of wasted effort. And since the Sega/Mega Mouse soon followed, it makes the decision to release Art Alive as is without developing the mouse to go with it all the more questionable. I haven't mentioned anything about audio so far because Art Alive is almost a completely silent title. There's music or sound effects that play when you have a tool for drawing toggled on, so that you know it's going to mark the page if you move the cursor. But other than that, nothing. I understand the design choice, but I really think it would have been better if there had been a few background music tracks, or at least the option to turn them on. I chose Art Alive for review this week because I knew I was going to be busy with Thanksgiving preparations, and I needed a title that wasn't going to be very deep or require a lot of my time, and boy did I get one. If I'm totally honest, Art Alive doesn't feel like a finished product, more like a demo that Sega shipped just so they could beat Mario Paint to the market. Don't get me wrong, it's fully functional, but the lack of included clip art and animations, the inability to have more than 16 colors on screen at the time in an art program, the clunkiness of having to use your gamepad instead of a mouse, and the fact that you can't save any of your work makes Art Alive seem like a half-baked idea on its own, and a positively poor idea when compared to its contemporary Mario Paint. I can't see any reason to own this unless you're a collector, and for that reason, Art Alive gets the certified bomb rating from Zilog and Moto. I thought about giving it 1 star because it works and it's not broken, but just because something works doesn't mean it should be celebrated. Avoid at all costs. Okay, that was Art Alive for the Genesis. It was definitely a different experience not actually playing a game for this week's review. Although, I can't say it was an enjoyable one. I think I'll stick to crayons and construction paper from now on. Oh, by the way, on a general programming note, I've got word that my main Genesis, Sega CD, and 32X is finally going to be worked on in the next few weeks, so I should have those back in time for Season 3 to start next year. As much as I like the Genesis and the Master System, it's going to be nice having those other 2 consoles back to spice things up from time to time. Tune in next week when it's time for another sports title, but this time on the Master System and not the Genesis. While it relates to a massive movie franchise, it stands alone on the Sega platform as a single title, although there have been other games released over the years on other consoles related to that franchise. But we're not talking about those, just the Master System original. I hope everyone had a happy Thanksgiving if you celebrate it, and in that theme, remember, whatever you like to play, have fun, and be excellent to each other. Later.